So, something I never really realized until I got into education full time was that there's this big gray area around special education or exceptional children's programs. What does it mean? What is the purpose of those teachers, and why do these programs even exist? I came into the education profession as a lateral entry teacher after finishing my bachelor's degree in political science. I had planned on moving back to Washington, D.C., was so ready to dive into the world of politics, and got caught up with a group of students who I was fortunate enough to be able to stay and work with at the high school level for a year, and then I made the transition down to elementary school level. But I've been very lucky over the past 3 years in enjoying this path into education, learning every day, and growing as I move through this process. More than anything, though, what I've really learned about is what my purpose is as a special education teacher or an EC teacher, so exceptional programs teacher. What does that mean for myself? What does it mean for the general education teachers, and what does it mean for my students? Why do we even exist? So that's what I really wanted to dig into and talk about today. So one thing that I have learned is that there's this big gray bubble around special education that we don't really address and talk about because I don't think anyone really knows the answers. So I've spent the past few weeks digging in and doing research on what that purpose is, taking everything I've learned from the past 3 years of teaching, taking all of my classwork and bringing it all together after meetings with my colleagues, interviews with administrators, and just figuring out what that piece really is in the puzzle of a school. So I think the first thing to start with is, what is the purpose of a special education teacher? The best way I think of to describe a special education teacher is that we are a support teacher. Our job is to support not only students but also teachers. We are not content teachers, but we are a specialist. We are special education teachers. We specialize in specially designed instruction. All the special words. So what does that even mean, though? So not only is a special education teacher's job to help teach and guide students with disabilities as they move through their years of school, but they are also responsible for all of the legal paperwork that goes into it and for ensuring that teachers throughout the school are following this legal paperwork. So what happened in 2004 was the IDEA law was put into place. This was a recreation of a law from the 70s and this new law was Congress's attempt to clear up any discrepancies that might exist for what it means to properly educate a child with a disability. What this law's goal is to say from the top down that it is our job as educators to set the bar for students with disabilities higher than a typical student. We should not be lowering our standards to meet these students where they are or to meet what they need, but rather we should be taking that bar, pushing it up to the next level and saying, no, I need you to meet me here. And we're going to figure out the way to get you here. Because the reality of the situation is life is not going to be easy. Life is not fair. Life is not going to level the playing field for them. So it is our job as teachers and as educators to take these students and really push and address what are their deficits. What is their disability? How is this impacting their ability to access general education, a standard course of study? So in order for a student to be considered a student with a disability, they must have one of 13 disability areas that is recognized by IDEA. What IDEA clarifies as a disability is autism, deaf and blindness, deafness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disability, speech language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment. All of this comes together, and the bottom line is that this disability, whatever is determined or found to be the underlying cause for their impact on education, must be directly correlated with their disability. I'm going to dig into that even more. And it also has one other piece of that. It says that a child must gain a measurable benefit from the specially designed instruction. So on one hand, a student or a child's disability must be what is causing the impact on their ability to access the general education classroom. and most importantly, they must get a measurable benefit from it. So if they're not going to show growth and if they're not going to show demonstrated benefit from receiving some form of specially designed instruction, then we need to be looking at, is that really what they need? Do they need an IEP? Do they need special education services? Maybe the student has a disability, but they really just need a 504. A 504 plan can provide accommodations, it can provide modifications. This is fantastic for most students with ADHD or some medical conditions that really they just need some adjustments to their work in the classroom, whether it be more extended time on assignments, or maybe they have 3 instead of 4 answer choices. It's the same content, it's the same material, it's the same expectations. However, they just need to see it a little bit differently. There's a couple other pieces of IDEA that I want to touch on briefly. The first is that there's this concept of free and appropriate public education. It's called FAPE. We hear this all the time, but what does that even mean? What it means is that every child that comes into our buildings every day must be provided with a meaningful education. This is our requirement and what we have to take on as professionals to say, every student that walks through these doors, we are going to figure out what we have to do to allow them to grow and have a benefit educationally. That includes their academic and their functional performance. Also, it says that a student with a disability must be provided with this specially designed instruction and any necessary services that allows them to benefit educationally. That's where we're going to see the individualized education plan. That's the next part of IDEA that is important to know about. An individualized education plan, or what we really refer to as an IEP, is just a guide. It is what the school is going to use, created by a team led by the special education teacher. And what this guide is what will the team be doing and the school be doing to meet the requirements and the mandates in IDEA for a student who qualifies for exceptional children or special education children's services. And if you want to check out one of my other videos, I'm going to talk more about what requirements are, how you get to that process, and what specifically different areas of eligibility mean. And then the last piece of IDEA that is super important is what's called the least restrictive environment. And with this, what we're looking at is students have to spend as much of the school day with their non-disabled peers as possible inside the classroom, inside the general education classroom. So where does the balance between their need for specially designed instruction and their need to perform on age-appropriate and grade-appropriate standards come into play? How do we make that happen? So it does say this with the maximum extent possible. So there are exceptions. There are always going to be exceptions. And what's really important to look at is when we are talking about specifically designed instruction, and when we're talking about the least restrictive environment, and when we're creating these IEPs, the bottom line is that if a student's disability area, finds them eligible for these specially designed education services, is not being met, that need and that skill deficit is not being met but for this area of specifically designed instruction, then that's not something that they need. That's not something that they need yet. This might be something that we find that they need, but we're going to have to go and take steps on a different level before they get to this excluded level. The biggest thing I like to talk about or mention when I talk about special education services and I talk about students with disabilities is that when a student is found eligible for special education, we are putting a label on them. We are telling this kid that there is something about them that's not good enough. We are telling this kid that there's something about them that makes them different. And no matter how we approach it and how we address it and how we make it okay, they are always going to have that knowledge that I'm different. And it's going to be an uphill battle in teaching them how to accept that and how to approach the classroom in a positive way, because there are students who are different, and being different is not bad and it is not wrong. I wouldn't have given up so much to become a teacher and work in this field if I felt that way by any means. However, I do think it's important for us as teachers and us as educators and us as leaders to step back and say, do I need to be putting this label on this kid? Just because they have ADHD Doesn't mean they need specially designed instruction. Doesn't mean they need a label and the stigma that can come with an IEP. These are things that can stay with a child for the rest of their lives. Students with IEPs have higher suspension rates, they have higher rates of severe behavior, they are more likely to drop out, and they are more likely to never attend college. We really need to be thinking about what benefit we're providing to students before we start labeling them. So that's all I have for right now on IDEA, but please check out some of my other videos as I talk about the different areas of eligibility, the processes of intervention in MTSS, and what it means to be receiving specially designed instruction.